First story, by Rachel Thompson. It was a chilly autumn night in the heart of Chicago, and I found myself walking alone through the desolate streets after a late night at the office. The city that never sleeps was unusually quiet. The only sounds echoing were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional gust of wind rustling the fallen leaves. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. As I navigated the labyrinthine streets, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started as a subtle prickling at the back of my neck, but soon it escalated into a full-blown paranoia. I quickened my pace, my heels echoing in the empty alleyways. Glancing around, I saw no one in sight. The storefronts were all closed, and the few pedestrians who were out had disappeared into the night. As I approached a dimly lit intersection, I heard footsteps behind me. I stole a glance over my shoulder, only to see a silhouette disappearing into the shadows. My heart raced, and I veered into a more crowded area, hoping the presence would dissipate in the anonymity of the city crowd. The footsteps persisted, though, growing louder and more deliberate. Panic set in as I realized I was being followed. I made a sharp turn down a narrow alley, hoping to lose whoever was tailing me. The alley was dimly lit, with flickering bulbs overhead casting erratic shadows on the brick walls. I could hear the footsteps closing in, and my breath caught in my throat. Then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I hesitated for a moment, my senses on high alert. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned around slowly, expecting to confront my pursuer. To my relief, I found myself alone in the alley. But that relief was short-lived. The silence was shattered by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls around me. My eyes widened as I scanned the shadows, searching for the source of the unearthly sound. The air grew colder, and I felt an invisible force closing in on me. Without another thought, I sprinted out of the alley and into the nearest open street. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a prank? A figment of my imagination? I couldn't be sure. I continued my journey home, glancing over my shoulder at every turn. The city seemed different now, more menacing. The once familiar streets now held secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural lurked in the shadows. That night, I learned that the city's facade of familiarity could crumble, revealing a hidden world that thrived in the darkness. Second story, by James Mitchell. Late one night in the heart of New York City, I found myself trudging through the city streets after a particularly grueling shift at the restaurant where I worked. The neon signs that adorned Times Square had long lost their vibrant glow, leaving the area shrouded in an eerie half-light. I weaved through the sparse crowd, the distant sirens and honking horns providing a dissonant soundtrack to my solitary walk. As I approached the subway station, a man emerged from the shadows, his face hidden beneath the brim of a tattered hat. He moved with a peculiar gait, a deliberate shuffle that set my nerves on edge. Instinctively, I quickened my pace, but the man matched my every step. A glance over my shoulder revealed his eyes fixed on me, gleaming with an unsettling intensity. I decided to take a detour through a poorly lit alley, hoping to lose him in the labyrinthine side streets. The narrow path was damp, the scent of garbage lingering in the air. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and I strained my ears to discern any signs of pursuit. The alley seemed deserted, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Just as I convinced myself that I had evaded my mysterious follower, I heard a soft whisper behind me. "You can't escape." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I spun around to confront the source. The alley was empty, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Unease settled over me like a heavy fog as I continued my journey home. The once familiar streets now felt like a maze, each turn concealing hidden threats. I quickened my pace, the echo of my footsteps creating a discordant symphony with the beating of my heart. As I reached my apartment building, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, stepping into the dim light of the entrance. It was the same man from before, his eyes fixed on me with an unwavering gaze. I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling as I tried to unlock the door. The man took a step closer, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "You can't escape," he repeated, his voice sending shivers down my spine. With a final desperate twist of the key, I managed to slip inside the safety of the building. I dared not look back as I sprinted up the stairs to my apartment, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. Safe behind the locked door, I peered through the peephole, half expecting to see the man still lingering in the hallway. But there was nothing, only the empty corridor bathed in the harsh glow of flickering fluorescent lights. That night, I realized that the city's bustling facade could harbor dark secrets, and the shadows held more than just the absence of light. They concealed the unknown and the inexplicable. Third story, by Anonymous. It was a fog-laden night in the historic streets of London. Having finished a late shift at the museum, I embarked on a solitary walk through the city that seemed to exist in a time warp of its own. The gas lamps cast feeble circles of light, creating pockets of visibility in the dense mist that clung to the cobblestone streets. As I wandered through the labyrinthine alleys, I noticed a figure in the distance. Tall and imposing, the person moved with an unsettling grace. I dismissed it as a fellow night owl until I realized they were shadowing my every step. Panic set in as I tried to rationalize the situation, but the feeling of being pursued grew more pronounced with each turn. I decided to take refuge in the crowded thoroughfare of Covent Garden, hoping the bustling market would provide a shield against my mysterious follower. The lively atmosphere did little to ease my anxiety, though, as I felt a pair of eyes boring into the back of my head. I quickened my pace, weaving through the crowd, but the figure persisted. As I approached the historic St. Paul's Cathedral, the fog thickened, swallowing the grand structure in an otherworldly haze. The distant tolling of the church bells created an eerie symphony, heightening the surreal atmosphere. I sought solace in the sacred aura of the cathedral, hoping the ancient stone walls would shield me from whatever malevolent force lurked in the mist. The moment I stepped into the shadow of the cathedral, the fog seemed to coalesce into a swirling vortex. Shapes moved within the opaque curtain, and the air became charged with an otherworldly energy. The gas lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows on the centuries-old walls. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, and a voice whispered in my ear, "You can't escape." The words reverberated through the cathedral, sending shivers down my spine. I stumbled backward, my eyes wide with terror. The mist seemed to reach out for me, tendrils curling around my limbs, pulling me into its ethereal embrace. With a burst of adrenaline, I broke free from the ghostly grip and sprinted out of the cathedral. The fog clung to me like a phantom, but I refused to succumb to the unknown force that sought to ensnare me. As I emerged into the slightly clearer streets, I glanced back at the cathedral, half expecting to see the figure within the mist. But there was nothing. The fog had swallowed the cathedral whole, leaving only a distant tolling of bells as a haunting reminder of the supernatural encounter. That night, I learned that even the storied streets of London could harbor mysteries beyond the realms of reason, and the city's ancient architecture held secrets that transcended the boundaries of time. Fourth Story, by Emily Foster. In the quiet town of Charleston, South Carolina, a southern charm that usually embraced the streets turned foreboding in the late hours. I found myself on one such night, walking home from my office at a publishing house. The gas lamps cast a warm glow on the cobblestone streets, but their flickering seemed to create dancing shadows that played tricks on my imagination. As I approached Waterfront Park, a sense of unease settled in. The rhythmic lapping of the Cooper River against the docks provided an eerie backdrop to my footsteps. Glancing around, I noticed a man sitting on one of the park benches, his features obscured by the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes followed my every move. Ignoring my apprehension, I continued along the path that led to the historic Rainbow Row. The pastel-colored houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows reflecting the moonlight. It was then that I heard footsteps behind me, a deliberate, echoing cadence that mirrored my own. I quickened my pace, the echoes growing louder until they seemed to be just a few steps behind me. I dared not look back, my heart pounding as I reached the end of Rainbow Row. The footsteps ceased abruptly. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned onto a quieter street, the footsteps returned, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl. Panic set in as I realized I was not alone. The gas lamps flickered violently as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity, and a twisted smile played on his lips. "You can't escape," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like a curse. I stumbled backward, my mind racing for an escape. I darted into an alley, the cold brick walls closing in around me. The footsteps pursued, and the growl grew louder. I found myself at a dead end, the only exit blocked by the sinister figure. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I searched for a way out. With nowhere to run, I confronted the figure, his malevolent gaze piercing through the darkness. The growl intensified, emanating not from him but from the shadows themselves. As the figure lunged at me, the world seemed to warp, and I found myself falling into an abyss of darkness. When I awoke, I was back on the deserted streets of Charleston, the gas lamps casting a warm glow on the cobblestones. The ominous figure was gone, leaving only the lingering sensation of an encounter with something beyond comprehension. That night, I realized the charming streets of Charleston concealed secrets that defied the laws of reality, and the very fabric of the town held echoes of a supernatural presence. Fifth Story, by Daniel Rodriguez. In the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles, where the city lights usually painted the night sky with a vibrant glow, I found myself walking home after a late shift in a high-rise office building. The towering skyscrapers loomed overhead, their glass facades reflecting the neon signs that adorned the streets below. As I navigated the labyrinthine streets of downtown LA, a distant thunderstorm added an eerie ambience to the night. The occasional flash of lightning illuminated the cityscape, casting long, menacing shadows that seemed to stretch and contort with each step I took. The rhythmic patter of raindrops on the pavement echoed in the deserted alleys. Turning a corner, I stumbled upon an open-air market that, despite the late hour, was bustling with activity. Stalls selling exotic fruits and trinkets were interspersed with food vendors peddling their aromatic wares. The lively atmosphere provided a temporary respite from the tension that had been building within me. However, as I weaved through the market, I noticed a peculiar figure standing near the edge of the crowd. Dressed in a tattered trench coat and wearing a wide-brimmed hat, the person seemed out of place amid the vibrant chaos. Their eyes, hidden in the shadows, bore into me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, the rain intensifying as I made my way toward the looming skyscrapers. The thunderstorm grew more ferocious, the flashes of lightning revealing the mysterious figure still tailing me. The crowded market had given way to desolate streets, and the distant rumble of thunder drowned out the city's usual hum. As I approached Pershing Square, the figure emerged from the shadows, their hat pulled low to conceal their face. "You can't escape," they whispered, their voice carrying on the damp night air. Panic surged through me as I realized the relentless pursuit was not a product of my imagination. I ducked into the park, hoping the dense trees would provide cover. The rain poured down in sheets, masking my footsteps as I maneuvered through the foliage. The figure, however, seemed undeterred, their silhouette a haunting presence in the misty darkness. A sudden gust of wind sent the rain cascading from the trees, revealing the figure standing just a few feet away. The hat was now gone, revealing a face obscured by a twisted mask. I recoiled, my back against a rain-soaked tree, as the figure advanced with an unnatural, unhurried grace. In the midst of the storm, the figure spoke once more, their words carried by the wind. "You can't escape." With that, they vanished into the night, leaving me alone in the rain-soaked park. Bewildered and soaked to the bone, I stumbled back onto the city streets, haunted by the realization that Los Angeles, despite its glamorous facade, held mysteries that transcended the boundaries of the rational. That night, the relentless pursuit through the storm-choked city left me questioning the nature of reality itself. Sixth Story, by Sarah Miller. It was a frigid winter night in Boston, the air biting through layers of clothing as I trudged through the snow-covered streets. The city, adorned in a blanket of white, exuded a serene beauty that belied the unease settling within me. Having just wrapped up a late shift at a tech startup, I navigated the deserted streets with only the occasional passing car disturbing the stillness. As I approached the historic Boston Common, the ancient trees stood like skeletal sentinels against the winter sky. The lampposts cast long shadows on the snow, creating an ethereal landscape. The crunch of my boots on the icy pavement echoed in the silence, each step magnified in the stillness of the night. Midway through the common, I noticed a figure standing beneath the gnarled branches of a massive oak. Their back was turned to me, but the hunched posture gave off an air of desolation. As I approached, the figure turned, revealing a face obscured by a tattered scarf. Their eyes, however, gleamed with an unsettling intensity that cut through the icy darkness. Ignoring the sense of foreboding, I continued on my path, my breath visible in the frigid air. The figure fell into step behind me, their footfalls muffled by the snow. A chill ran down my spine as I quickened my pace, the echoes of footsteps growing more insistent. Glancing over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the figure, their eyes fixed on me with an unwavering gaze. I turned a corner, hoping to lose them in the labyrinthine streets of Beacon Hill. The narrow alleys and cobblestone paths seemed to twist and turn endlessly, the snow muffling all sound. Yet the figure persisted, their presence an ominous shadow in the wintry night. As I reached the quiet residential streets, the snowfall intensified, creating a soft veil of white that obscured my surroundings. The figure emerged from the swirling flakes, their form appearing more ethereal than ever. "You can't escape," they whispered, the words carried by the biting wind. Dread settled over me as I realized the figure was no longer just a person but a harbinger of something beyond comprehension. The snowfall intensified, the flakes swirling in a dance that seemed to defy the laws of nature. The streetlights flickered, casting erratic beams through the storm. In the midst of the tempest, the figure advanced, their scarf now billowing like a spectral shroud. With each step, the snow beneath their feet remained untouched, as if the winter landscape itself yielded to their presence. Panic set in as I stumbled backward, the figure's gaze never wavering. Just as the storm reached its peak, the figure dissipated into the blizzard, leaving me alone in the swirling chaos. The snowfall gradually abated, the cityscape returning to a serene winter night. Bewildered and chilled to the bone, I continued my journey home, haunted by the realization that Boston, in its winter silence, harbored forces that defied the boundaries of reality. Seventh Story, by Alexander Klein. In the heart of San Francisco, where the city lights merged with the fog rolling in from the bay, I found myself walking along the deserted piers after a late shift at a tech company. The distant sounds of seagulls and the creaking of boats were the only companions to my solitary footsteps. The city that usually buzzed with activity now lay shrouded in a thick mist, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. As I walked along the deserted Embarcadero, the fog played tricks on my senses, distorting the outlines of the iconic Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. The sodium vapor lamps cast a dim glow on the wooden planks beneath my feet, creating an eerie path that stretched into the unknown. Unease settled in, amplified by the occasional horn of a distant ship. A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, their silhouette gradually taking shape. Dressed in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, the person seemed to materialize out of the fog itself. Their face was hidden in the shadows, and a shiver ran down my spine as I realized they matched their steps with mine. I quickened my pace, the fog closing in like a ghostly embrace. The figure, however, remained a constant presence, their footsteps echoing mine with an unsettling precision. I turned into an alley, hoping to escape the pursuing shadow, but it only deepened, the fog conspiring to keep the figure in my peripheral vision. The alley twisted and turned, a labyrinth that seemed to defy the city's grid. The occasional glow of neon signs flickered through the mist, creating an otherworldly kaleidoscope. My breath quickened as I realized the figure was no longer just a stranger but a relentless force, their presence bending the very fabric of the fog-drenched night. "You can't escape," the figure whispered, their voice carried by the ethereal fog. Panic set in as I stumbled backward, my senses disoriented by the dissonant symphony of the foghorn and the distant city sounds. The figure advanced, their hat now lifted to reveal eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly intensity. I emerged from the alley onto a deserted pier, the fog now thickening to the point of obscurity. The figure stood at the edge, their form merging with the mist, creating a spectral apparition. The air grew colder as they extended a hand, beckoning me to the edge of the pier. With a surge of terror, I turned and fled, the fog seeming to close in around me. The world became a blur of indistinct shapes, and the distant sounds of the city transformed into haunting echoes. As I reached the end of the pier, I hesitated, the figure's whisper echoing in my mind. In that moment, the fog lifted, revealing the cityscape bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The figure had vanished, leaving me alone on the deserted pier. Bewildered and shaken, I stumbled back onto the familiar streets of San Francisco, haunted by the realization that the city, in its foggy embrace, concealed mysteries that transcended the boundaries of the rational. That night, the relentless pursuit through the mist-choked piers left me questioning the nature of reality itself. 8th Story, by Olivia Morgan. On a muggy summer night in New Orleans, where the sultry air carried the rhythm of distant jazz, I found myself walking through the French Quarter after a late shift at a local gallery. The neon signs and wrought iron balconies exuded an enchanting charm, but the humidity hung thick, creating an atmosphere that seemed to vibrate with unseen energy. The streets, usually filled with revelers, now lay in an eerie stillness. As I meandered down Royal Street, the flickering gas lamps cast wavering shadows on the colorful facades of historic buildings. The occasional notes of a saxophone wafted through the air, creating a haunting melody that hung in the night like a ghostly presence. A sense of anticipation built within me, as if the city itself held its breath. Turning onto Pirates Alley, I noticed a figure at the end of the narrow cobblestone path. Dressed in tattered clothes that seemed out of place amidst the vibrant atmosphere, the person stood with a posture that hinted at a silent invitation. The gas lamps cast their glow, revealing a face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. Despite the humid air, a chill ran down my spine as I continued along the alley. The figure fell into step behind me, their footsteps muted by the uneven cobblestones. The distant hum of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the muffled echoes of our solitary journey through the quiet alley. A sense of foreboding settled in as I quickened my pace, the figure matching my every step. I turned into a dimly lit courtyard, surrounded by the ancient walls of St. Louis Cathedral. The moon cast a silvery glow on the wrought iron gates, creating intricate patterns on the ground. The figure, however, remained a persistent shadow, their presence undeterred by the sanctity of the historic site. "You can't escape." A whisper echoed through the courtyard, the words carried by the humid breeze. Panic gripped me as I realized the figure was no longer just a person but a harbinger of something beyond the veil of the living. The courtyard seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the very air charged with an unseen force. I stumbled backward as the figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing eyes that gleamed with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the fabric of reality. The shadows cast by the intricate ironwork contorted, creating a surreal dance on the ground. I felt an inexplicable pull, as if the courtyard itself was urging me to confront the enigmatic figure. In that moment, the courtyard transformed. The air grew thick with an otherworldly presence, and the wrought iron gates creaked as if opening to a dimension beyond human comprehension. The figure extended a hand, their fingers reaching into the fabric of the moonlit night. Fear and fascination held me captive as I approached, the boundary between the tangible and the ethereal dissolving. Just as I hesitated at the threshold, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the hallowed courtyard. The air returned to its muggy normalcy, and the distant sounds of jazz resumed their playful dance through the night. Bewildered and shaken, I stepped back onto the lively streets of the French Quarter, haunted by the realization that New Orleans, with its mystical allure, harbored secrets that transcended the boundaries of the natural world. That night, the encounter in the moonlit courtyard left me questioning the very fabric of existence. 9th Story, by Benjamin Thompson. In the sprawling city of Miami, where the vibrant nightlife usually thrived, I found myself on a late-night stroll along the sun-soaked streets after a grueling shift at a high-end restaurant. The neon lights of South Beach had dimmed, leaving the palm-lined avenues in a hazy glow. The distant sounds of the ocean provided a soothing backdrop to the deserted streets. As I walked along Ocean Drive, the Art Deco buildings stood like silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of the city's energy. The warm breeze carried the scent of the sea, creating an atmosphere that felt both tranquil and unsettling. The rows of pastel-colored facades seemed to hide secrets beneath their glamorous exteriors. Turning onto a quieter street, I noticed a figure leaning against the wall of a closed beachfront cafe. Their silhouette, barely visible in the dim light, exuded an air of quiet contemplation. A sudden chill ran down my spine as I realized the figure was watching me, their gaze penetrating the night like a hidden force. I quickened my pace, the rhythmic crashing of the waves becoming a distant echo. The figure, however, emerged from the shadows, their footsteps a barely audible whisper against the pavement. The glamour of Miami's nightlife now felt like a facade, and the once inviting streets seemed to twist and turn in disorienting patterns. As I approached an alley, the figure spoke, their voice carrying a weight that resonated in the humid air. "You can't escape." The words hung in the night, a dissonant note in the symphony of the city. Panic set in as I turned into the alley, the dimly lit path narrowing with each step. The figure followed, their presence an ominous shadow against the pastel walls. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly, the neon signs of the vibrant city now reduced to a distant hum. The figure's voice echoed through the narrow passage, the words creating a disconcerting harmony with the night. At the end of the alley, the figure stepped into a pool of flickering light. Their face, obscured by the brim of a wide hat, revealed only the glint of eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the ocean. The air thickened as the surroundings distorted, the once familiar streets now a surreal dreamscape. "You can't escape," the figure repeated, their words weaving into the very fabric of the night. A surreal dance of shadows played on the walls as the figure extended a hand, the gesture both inviting and foreboding. Fear and curiosity battled within me as I approached, the boundary between reality and illusion blurring. Just as I hesitated at the threshold, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the surreal alley. The distant sounds of the city resumed their nocturnal serenade, and the glamour of Miami's nightlife returned. Bewildered and shaken, I stepped back onto the familiar streets, haunted by the realization that the city, with its glamorous allure, concealed mysteries that transcended the boundaries of perception. That night, the encounter in the disorienting alley left me questioning the very nature of reality itself. 10th Story by Gabriel Martinez. On a crisp autumn night in Seattle, where the drizzle seemed to meld with the cityscape in a symphony of muted lights, I found myself navigating the labyrinthine streets after a late shift at a tech company. The Space Needle loomed in the distance, its metallic spire disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. The damp air clung to my clothes as I walked, the city seemingly wrapped in a shroud of perpetual mist. As I strolled along the quiet streets of Capitol Hill, the glow of eclectic storefronts cast a subdued radiance on the wet pavement. The gentle hum of the city seemed to resonate with the soft patter of raindrops, creating an ambience that was both soothing and eerie. Despite the familiar surroundings, a subtle sense of disquiet settled within me. Turning onto a narrow alley, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows. Their silhouette, obscured by the overhanging eaves, appeared like a specter against the damp brick walls. The city sounds faded, and the rhythmic tap of my footsteps on the slick cobblestones became the only audible melody. A feeling of being observed intensified with each step. Attempting to dismiss the unease, I pressed forward. The figure fell into step behind me, their footsteps almost imperceptible against the ambient sounds of the night. The alley twisted and turned, and the wet bricks seemed to glisten with an unnatural sheen, reflecting the spectral glow of the distant city lights. As I continued, the figure's presence became more palpable. A whisper of wind carried a voice, almost drowned by the rain, uttering words that seemed both familiar and disconcerting. "You can't escape." The alley, once a mundane shortcut, transformed into a conduit of shadows and whispers. Desperation prompted me to quicken my pace, but the figure maintained a steady pursuit. I turned into an open square, hoping the exposure would dissolve the disquieting atmosphere. To my dismay, the square was deserted, the storefronts now darkened, their neon signs extinguished. The city had taken on an unfamiliar emptiness. In the center of the square, a lone lamppost flickered, casting an erratic glow. The figure emerged into the meager light, revealing features that seemed to shift like the reflections on wet pavement. The rain fell in a steady cadence, the droplets creating ripples in the puddles beneath our feet. "You can't escape," the figure repeated, their voice now resonating with a haunting echo. The square seemed to contract, the lamppost casting elongated shadows that twisted and writhed. Panic seized me as I felt the boundaries of reality warp, the city around me succumbing to a surreal distortion. I stumbled backward, the wet cobblestones unforgiving beneath my feet. The figure advanced, their form elongating like a mirage in the rain-soaked night. The air itself felt charged with an inexplicable energy, as if the very essence of the city had been manipulated by an unseen force. In that moment of surreal distortion, the figure extended a hand, the raindrops seemingly suspended in midair. Fear and fascination held me in a paradoxical trance. As I hesitated at the threshold, the figure dissipated like mist, leaving me alone in the disorienting square. The rain continued its gentle descent, the city returning to its familiar cadence. Bewildered and shaken, I retraced my steps through the winding alleys, haunted by the realization that Seattle, with its damp charm, concealed mysteries that transcended the boundaries of perception. That night, the encounter in the distorted square left me questioning the very fabric of reality, and the city's enigmatic allure lingered in the recesses of my mind. Thank you for sticking with us through the whole video. Also, I recommend you this video you see on screen, one of the scariest on my channel. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. This helps me bring you more thrilling content every day. If this video sent shivers down your spine, let me know in the comments.